Hey guys, what's up? It's Logan. I have been talking about Bitcoin for a long time now. It feels like 2 or 3 years, and a lot of people still wonder why. And I really want to be able to break that down and help people understand not just like why I talk about Bitcoin so much, but where it fits in my life. Because money fits in really all of our lives, whether we like it or not. It has to fit in our life because it's just a standard. It's a construct that humans use to communicate. It's the way that we put value towards things. If we believe in something or we want something, we use money to do that, and we use our time to obtain the money to do that. So, I without talking about this too analytically, I really want to talk about that from the perspective of the church, because I know this is like a hard left turn, but when someone takes their time and puts it towards the local church, they are essentially communicating in a different way to the values that they seek and they want for their family. And so through that, I want the same. And I guess in order for me to give back in the best way that I know that I can, I need to listen to what God's telling me to do and communicate about Bitcoin in a way that isn't self-seeking, isn't, I don't say all the way it isn't. Do this all the time. Start a video and say what it isn't. I want to say what it is. I would like for people to, I would like for Christians to learn about Bitcoin in the way that I've been learning about it, and through the context of what God says about money. Why? Bible talks so much about money, and we talk so little about it in our daily lives and in our church even. So to almost like sidestep Bitcoin into the conversation in the church is to allow the church to talk about money again in a way that allows them to think about it truthfully. They can think about money truthfully. They don't have to think about capital necessarily. They can think about how, again, what we talked about in the beginning, how time buys you money, and then how money buys you things. And once we have that concept and we inject God's conversation, what he says about it, into the conversation of Bitcoin, we can begin to have a respect for this money because it is unlike anything that we've ever used as humans in the past. So, long story short, about a year and a half ago now, I wrote a paper for my church. And it was, about a year and a half into my journey for Bitcoin. I felt like I kind of knew what I was getting into at that point. I had, done the 1,000 hours of research, I think they say, is what you need to do. But I really had allowed this to enter, my life, but I wanted the respect that came along with it. And so one of the terms in Bitcoin is stay humble and stack sats. I guess I want to have a respect for that. I want to be able to understand what that means, and not just hold on for dear life because I have to, but be able to hold on because God allows me to. So I would like to take maybe, I don't know how long this is going to be, the next 30, 40 minutes and read the paper that I wrote to my church that allowed them to start their Bitcoin journey in their own pace. And so here it is. Check it out. Hey, it's editor Logan. I changed my microphone. It might sound a bit different. It's the next day, but I'm really sorry. This video at the very beginning is like blurry for the first 30 minutes. I was trying to figure out my microphone from yesterday. That's why I changed it. But yeah, the first 15 minutes of this is a little bit blurry on my face. I hope you can just listen to it and get a lot out of it. It's really just about the audio anyway. My face is just blabbing. So enjoy. Let's just go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to pause and interject when needed. So Proverbs 23:23 reads, "Buy truth and do not sell it. Buy wisdom, instruction, and understanding." It is my prayer that God blesses the church and the people who choose to provide their tithes and offerings in this asset that requires just that: understanding, instruction, and wisdom, just as King Solomon was teaching in the proverb that I just read. In this video, we'll take a basic walkthrough of the importance of Bitcoin as the world's first digitally sound money and the necessary steps to secure it in a wallet. God allowed a person by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto to leverage a technology that had been built in the past to create and distribute a brand new form of money into the world. Unlike our current debt-based monetary system, Bitcoin is based around this idea of a fixed monetary supply, meaning it's like a fixed unit. There's only 21 million of them. There's only a certain amount. Whereas like with dollars, they can print them infinitely. And it just takes like legislation to pass it in order for them to print more money, which devalues yours. Although it may seem like Bitcoin arose out of a single idea, the image above, the image shown here, is that showing that the technology was actually improvements built on top of the last. Satoshi Nakamoto was simply the individual that pulled all of these correlated computer science elements together and created the package system we know as Bitcoin. Just as the internet allows you to work behind a pseudonym or a username, Bitcoin follows the same rule and is synonymous. No one knows if Satoshi is a single person or a group of people. Once they created the currency, they made sure it was running for a year or two and then relinquished all their control. Even the Bitcoin they thought was Satoshi's that might have been minted or like mined by Satoshi haven't been moved from their original position, from the original wallets since they were mined. Scrooge McDuck is a cartoon that was created back in 1947. And even back then, he was teaching us about the importance of how creating too much money was a really bad idea. Through inflation, fiat money that we use today has twisted the idea of value and has caused our society to enter a mindset of cheap debt. Because the dollars that we use, they're being printed infinitely. The dollars we earned yesterday are less valuable today if we hold on to them. As this opposite of fiat money, okay, the ability to change the number of expendable units in Bitcoin is not able to happen. It's 21 million at its core. Just as like a dollar, though, can be split up, right? So 21 million Bitcoin, and people always say to me like, oh, well, that's like $70,000 for a Bitcoin. Okay, take your mind off that real quick and think about the fact that those Bitcoin can be split. As a stark contrast of fiat's money ability to change the number of expendable units through legislation, Bitcoin has a fixed supply of 21 million at its core. But just as a dollar can be divided into 100 pennies, each 21 million Bitcoin are divisible by 100 million. And that's like Satoshis. They're the smallest unit of Bitcoin. So it's like a penny, right? Like a penny of Bitcoin is 100 million of a Bitcoin. And that's so that way they can be divided. If you think about it the opposite way, you'd be timesing it. So 21 million Bitcoin times 100 million sats, right? Because 100 million sats in 21 million Bitcoin equals 2.1 quadrillion. It seems like a huge number, but bear with me, okay? Those 2.1 quadrillion sats is the fixed supply. That's the fixed number. It's not changing. And because that money has a fixed supply, you cannot fake it. You can't change that number. You would have to change the actual protocol itself. And people have tried to do this with different cryptocurrencies. They've said, well, let's make one that has 22 million and one that has 28 million. And it's like, no, we created one. It was Bitcoin. It has 21 million Bitcoin, and that's what I know it to be as. And so I run code that verifies that. Again, that's a stark contrast to dollars, because like crooks have printed fake money in the past, and like they get away with it. Like that is something that, devalues everyone else's money when you print fake money. Okay, well, what's to say the Federal Reserve is not just like printing more money and stealing the wealth, right? When they do that, they are stealing the wealth necessarily. So it's a fine line between, hey, I'm going to have self-defense and not let myself be stolen from. And then on the other side, I'm not like you have to decide, like, am I going to use a currency that I know through printing is going to be stolen from me? Proverbs 22:7 reads, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender." So just keep this in mind as we move forward. Bitcoin, the asset itself, is unique in the way that obviously there's a finite supply. We've talked through this. Hard coded is that number 21 million, and it doesn't change. It also doesn't really have any significance. Satoshi chose the 21 million number as an educated guess for how many would needed to be to fulfill a simple math equation. And really the math equation is just, how long does it take for those 21 million Bitcoin to become available? And so that's important, right? How long does it take for all of the money to become available? I'll try to pull up a chart and show it right here on the screen. This is how long it took the US to print the same amount of money that we printed in the last 4 years. And you can see it's stark contrast. I mean, it's just insane how much money they are printing. And every time they do that, they're devaluing the money. Whereas with Bitcoin, the issuance, the ability to create it, the issuance is defined at a certain amount and at a certain reward time. So when Bitcoin started, the initial reward that you would get for finding a block, like whenever you discover one, is that you would be rewarded 50 Bitcoin. So if you're running a computer and you're running the Bitcoin code and your computer finds a block, you're rewarded 50 Bitcoin. And those blocks last only 10 minutes long. So this is a very simple breakdown, and I'm doing this off the cuff. Completely off the screen, because this is just a huge technical element to Bitcoin that you can't miss. And if you do, you miss out on what its solution actually is, because they can print dollars infinitely without anything other than just a stamp of approval from a couple people. That stamp of approval then steals from everyone else. In Bitcoin, you can't do that. Every single block has a finite amount that is to be rewarded to whoever finds the block. So for the first, it's called epoch, for the first bit of time, first 4 years, that amount of Bitcoin that would come out of a block every 10 minutes would be 50 Bitcoin. And then there's an event that takes place, and the event happens at what's called a block time. So it's after a certain number of blocks have been found, at number 210,000, the block reward. So instead of 50 coming out every block, it's only 25. So 25 then are released. Then it's 12 and a half. So from 25, after another 210,000 blocks pass, then another 25 is cut. It's cut in half again, from 25 to 12 and a half. And then after another 210,000 blocks have passed, about 4 years, it gets cut again. And now we're cut again. It's at 3.125 Bitcoin are distributed, are created every 10 minutes. And that's the beauty of it. That is the actual element that is released. When Bitcoin or new Bitcoin are created, it devalues the other Bitcoin that are in existence. That's important to remember. That is a true statement. Anytime that happens, it's supply and demand, right? So, but cutting that subsidy from 50 to 25 down to 12 and a half over that long of a period, like 4 years, allows you to have a currency that is predictable. Okay, so imagine for a second you're building a house, and so that's our life. Okay, we're gonna build our life, and in order to build our life, we have to use the tools that we've got, which money is a construct in our society, so we're gonna use that. Well, imagine now that we're gonna use these tools, the measuring stick, right? But every single day, someone comes in and changes the size of that measuring stick behind your back. You don't know. You have no clue. And so you come into work the next day to build your house, and someone changed the size of the ruler. Well, now your doors are all whopper-jawed, and none of your windows fit, and everything's skewed That's exactly what it's like when we try to build our life with dollars, right? The you can't get ahead because someone's changing how many dollars there are all the time. And so and it's proven you've basically lost 99% of your value over time anyway. If you hold dollars, we just went over that. Like someone in 1910 would be like, oh, $100 is so hard to obtain. And then today it's a trip to the grocery store. That's the reason the 21 million is so important. That keeping a finite supply of money is so important. And why blocks every 10 minutes are so important, right? Because when you have a predictable amount of money released in the open at a predictable amount of time, you can build your life. You can start to think ahead. I can start to think 4 years ahead or 6 years ahead or even a year ahead, because now I know, okay, someone's not going to be stealing my money next year. So I can start to build my life. But let's go a little deeper, because we have these blocks and we have this time that we really need to break down, and I need to get back to the script. The Bitcoin block is where the term blockchain comes from. Bitcoin blocks serve multiple functions and are a foundation to the stability of Bitcoin as a whole. Let's start with its most basic function, a transaction. Every time you move money or transact on the network, it's placed inside of a memory bank on the nodes, right? So we've talked about miners so far and how we know that uses energy, and we have now nodes. And nodes hold information. They hold all the data. So when you transact on the network, that transaction gets sent to a node, and then it's broadcast to all of them so that everybody knows about this transaction. And as long as it's valid, as long as it's a true transaction, which the only way to say that it's a true transaction is that it didn't break any of the consensus rules. Is it 21 million, and does it have a high enough fee? And has it come from a block that a known block? Has the Bitcoin come from a known block? And then it begins to verify those criteria, right? So when your transaction moves from yourself to the node, right? It then gets verified and moves from the node to the block and begins filling that up. The newly discovered block is connected to the last one, hence the term blockchain, right? This chain of blocks are held physically. They take up like literal hard drive space. And it's possible to download all of these transactions or all of the blocks and keep them for yourself or verify all of them for yourself. That process of having all of those is called owning a node or having a full node. Once a new block has been added to the previous one, it is completely impossible to reverse the transaction. It's what you would call reached finality. A new block would be discovered after that one, and the process begins all over again. Again, roughly 10 minutes for a block, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it doesn't stop. We learned earlier that every 210,000 of these blocks, the issuance is cut. And you can get to that like 4-year mark by just taking 210,000. Taking 210,000 and times it by 10 minutes. You get basically like 4 years. And so every 4 years, that amount of Bitcoin that's released to the public is cut in half. There's less available for everyone, not just like one person, not like one country. It's everyone all around the world. Is just there's less Bitcoin available at that instance. I hope I did a good job breaking down the blocks themselves. And this next part gets really heavy into mining, but it's really based around the idea of what miners do, right? So miners of Bitcoin are responsible for finding each block, and blocks are discovered using an algorithm. So they take a data set, which would be the last block's hash, and they take that and they try to find the next one. And what that means is they basically just use that hash as like a hat, and they throw numbers that match that hat in a bucket, right? So you just throw a bunch of numbers in the hat. They just throw a bunch of numbers in the hat, and they're like, these ones match, these ones match, these ones match, and all of them, trillions, all at the same time, are just flowing into trying to guess what the next one is. And once that has been found, roughly every 10 minutes or so, it is a math equation that has to take place in order to literally find it. But all of the miners all around the world jump onto that hash and start working their next block on top of that one. And so all of the miners all around the world discover the block together, and they work together to do that. In order for blocks to be discovered, I'm just going to say, just read the text here now. In order for blocks to be discovered, they're simply throwing trillions of numbers at a time to find the lowest one possible that matches the hat. At this point, the transactions, when the block is found, the transactions would move from the mempool, from the node, and begin filling up the block, and then it's added to the chain. This can be a little confusing at first and why this is important, but there's a great visual. Hopefully I've had it up on screen. You can see the transactions falling down into the pool down at the bottom, and then every once in a while it takes those and fills those up into a block. Now, since these transactions take a certain amount of data space, only a certain amount of transactions can fit into a Bitcoin block. A total space of 4 megabytes can be used for each block, and that's like theoretical. It's important that each block is not larger than 4 megabytes. Otherwise, the size of the entire blockchain, the whole history of this thing, would become way too large to hold on a single hard drive. And remember, the whole point of this is that you can verify all this data for yourself. So in order for you to obtain that data, you got to be able to download it, keep it, to be able to look over the elements of it, or even to be able to run your own node to submit your own transactions without having to submit a transaction to somebody else's node to have it verified, which is basically what you're doing whenever you first start up in Bitcoin. A big piece I want to talk about here is the energy expense. Bitcoin expends energy because it uses a process called mining. We talked a lot about it, and it connects those to the public ledger, and they're verified. All of these are verified all the time. Basically, you can think about it like a 10-minute audit that takes place on the entire network. And that audit verifies that all the transactions are real. The reason this is so novel is because of the energy expense. Think about how much energy, DC has to make in order to pass legislation to print money. Like, very little energy has to take place. And with that little energy expenditure and with impacting that many people, that's a problem. It's a small little switch that can be flipped, and then it affects all of Alabama. That's just crazy. So this idea of mining puts an energy expense, which we all need. You wouldn't be watching this video without energy. It puts that expense on money, on transacting. So it puts it makes people honestly work for the money, because they have to produce, they have to actually plug a machine in and provide energy in order to receive any type of reward. Let me just read the paper. It says, the energy expenditure creates a system of incentives for miners to behave honestly and contribute to the network's security. Miners are rewarded with newly created Bitcoin for efforts, but they only receive the reward if they follow the rules of the network and put valid transactions from the nodes in the blockchain. This means that miners have a financial incentive to work together to maintain the integrity of the network, rather than trying to cheat people. Again, this cannot be said for our current financial system. People nearest to the money printer work hard to keep control and power, rarely ever working together for the benefit of others. The Bitcoin expense allows decentralization of energy. Okay, one interesting concept of Bitcoin's energy consumption is that it can actually make use of wasted energy. Something like putting it on a geothermal power plant or putting it somewhere like hydroelectric. I've heard of some really great ones at hydro or like flaring. So another way like Bitcoin can make use of lost energy is through flaring. They burn off excess gas at like oil rigs or at these compressor stations where they have to move natural gas. And I've seen one over, just not too far away from where I live. And by setting up Bitcoin miners here, they don't have to flare off that gas. They can actually burn it on site. Because the reason they're burning it on site is because they have no use for it, right? The use for it is so far away, but you can put a miner there. You can burn that energy off. You have to do it anyway to move the gas. And now you've created a revenue source for the oil company, but also you're, using the wasted energy. So some people argue that its energy consumption can be justified by its benefits to providing. Even down in Texas, they're on their own energy grid in Texas. And so what they've done is hooked up, massive amounts of Bitcoin miners in times of low demand. So what that means is that whenever they have periods of high demand, what they'll do is they'll take the miners and just turn them offline in what's called demand response. And basically, if people need to heat their homes with electricity, they turn off the miners and they turn on the heaters. It's very simple, and it's how the power grid actually works. So it's creating use cases, and it's actually solving problems even as close as Texas. Now we're going to talk about keys and why they're stinking important, because they're like literally the most like private part of Bitcoin. So there's two main types of keys, public and private. Bitcoin uses these public and private key pairs to allow users to securely send and receive at like Bitcoin on the network. Each user, and we're talking about specifically on-chain transactions. It's just a term. It's a good one to learn, but the other one would be versus Lightning transactions. We're not talking about Lightning in this video. We're going to just focus just fully on just Bitcoin and the ledger itself. Each user has a unique public and private key pair that's mathematically related, but just because you have one, you can't derive the other one from it. So the public key is a long string of alphanumeric characters, and it serves as the user's address. This address is used to receive Bitcoin from other users on the network. It can be shared freely. It's kind of like the address to your house. Anyone who wants to send Bitcoin to the user, and it's accessible, like it's visible on the network. Anyone can kind of see that string. However, the private key is a shorter secret key that is known only to you. It's used to sign transactions that spend Bitcoin from your address. So you have Bitcoin in your address, and in order to move that, you have to have that private key that goes with it. It's important to keep this secure and safe. If anyone has access to the private key, they can spend your Bitcoin. The term is not your keys, not your coins. In order to send it, a user creates a transaction, and that specifies the recipient that you're going to send it to. And then you use that private key to sign the transaction, right? And that proves that you own it and that you send it to the other person. And ultimately what happens there in the middle is that you broadcast that to a node. It could be your own node. It could be somebody else's node. It could be the app's node that you're using. But they broadcast that to a node, and then the node verifies it, and it's added to the blockchain. The public and private key pair system is a key feature of Bitcoin's security model, as it ensures that only the owner of the Bitcoin address can spend the Bitcoin associated with that address. It also allows for transactions to be verified without needing a centralized authority or intermediary. Like I said, you could send the transaction to your own node, and then your own node can verify that, and so long as it's valid transaction, it has a high enough fee, and it was a pre-spent Bitcoin, you can transact it with what's called like no permission, like permissionless. So it's obviously important to remember, but to wrap up on keys, Whether or not you choose to keep your Bitcoin on like Coinbase or a Cash App or somewhere, or whether you choose to keep your Bitcoin in your own custody, there are keys involved. Someone's doing the key work in both of the scenarios. It's either going to be you or it's going to be someone else. And I would choose just to take responsibility. That's really the kind of the goal here, and the premise is to take responsibility for your money. And so that is that's kind of the wrap up on keys. One last thing to finish up on mining that they do in the blockchain and on the mining side of things and how that plays together is this 10-minute window. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but that 10-minute block time is a target, and it fluctuates. So sometimes it becomes, a little bit longer to find a block, and sometimes it becomes a little bit shorter to find a block. But the real key here, the reason that this technology is so profound, is because of the difficulty adjustment. And the difficulty adjustment, I could talk about it for an hour. I really like this feature. It's not really even a feature. It's just literally built in to Bitcoin. But let me read here. It says, the difficulty adjustment is made up of 216, the difficulty adjustment is made every 2016 blocks, approximately every 2 weeks. The goal of the adjustment is to ensure that blocks are added to the blockchain approximately every 10 minutes. The network and total computing power dedicated to mining increases, right? Okay, so let me say this part out loud because I can't read this. If you put more miners on the network, it becomes harder to find a Bitcoin. So the time it takes to find one goes up, right? So you have to, if more miners join the network, the total computing power dedicated to mining increases. The difficulty of mining new blocks is also increased. So whenever you plug more miners in, like if more people start mining Bitcoin, it's going to take longer to find the next block because more people are looking for it. The same is also true if people unplug. If people literally, like I said, down in Texas, unplug their miners because you need to power homes, it's going to become easier to find a Bitcoin. Literally, because people are unplugging miners, it becomes easier to find a Bitcoin. Similarly, if miners leave the network and the computing power decreases, the difficulty is decreased to ensure that blocks continue to be added at the same rate. This is important because you have to be able to plan your day. Like you can't, like even just 2 weeks ahead. If someone came in and changed the ruler, right, of how long it takes for Bitcoin to be found, if someone came in and changed that system, the way that I'm able to build my house changes. And it plays off the analogy I talked about earlier, but it's a really key element here that I love. The difficulty adjustment is a critical mechanism for keeping Bitcoin, the network itself, functioning smoothly and maintaining the integrity. By ensuring that blocks are added at a consistent rate, the difficulty adjustment helps prevent any one group of gaining too much power over the network. I mean, think about how much time it's going to take to plug in all those miners, and the difficulty adjustments happening in 2 weeks. Nodes. Bitcoin nodes are computers that are connected to the Bitcoin network, and unlike miners, they do not use extensive power. They engage in the process of adding new blocks to the blockchain, but instead serve in a way to verify the integrity of all the data. Nodes are important because they help ensure the blockchain's accurate and secure. Each node maintains an entire copy of the blockchain, which includes a record of every single Bitcoin transaction that have ever occurred. When a new transaction is made, it's broadcast to the entire network so that each node validates it to ensure that it's following the rules and that it's not fraudulent. Nodes also help prevent double spending, which is whenever a user attempts to spend the same Bitcoin twice. And what I mean by that is like you can send it twice, like you can send it to yourself and then back and then send it to yourself again. What I mean by double spending here is that like let's say that like someone has no Bitcoin in their wallet and then they send a transaction to the network that says, hey, I have 100 Bitcoin. Like nodes keep track of the balance of all the Bitcoin addresses across the entire blockchain and ensure that each transaction doesn't exceed the available balance. So if someone's like, I have 22 million Bitcoin, it's just going to decline it. In addition to these verification functions, the nodes also improve the overall resilience of the network because there's many nodes distributed through the world. The network is not resilient on a single point of failure. If one node goes down or becomes compromised, other nodes can continue to operate and maintain the network's functionality. While miners add new blocks to the network, they're incentivized through rewards. Nodes maintain a copy of the blockchain and help verify its accuracy and security. By verifying transactions and preventing double spending, nodes play an essential role in ensuring the integrity of the Bitcoin network. Like whenever I think about running a node, it's like being a light to the world, because I am saying I'm willing to put my time and energy, which is really just learning about the machine itself. I'm willing to put my time and energy into learning about this because I believe that having this kind of money versus having like legislative money is valuable, and that I believe it has a function. Like when you run a node, you're saying, I believe Bitcoin has a function and its function is to fight inflation. I think that's huge. So the aspect of running these types of things like on networks, they are reliant on other people, just like real world is. Like the real world's reliant on other people to get something done. And I think that's a huge piece to this. Similar to how the dollar is printed through legislation, which devalues the purchasing power of the dollar. If a user attempts to double spend or, say they have a valid transaction when it's invalid, the network will only confirm the valid one. This is because miners always select a transaction that has the most computational work because they're rewarded in that way. And miners will only include transactions that are legitimate because that's what their purpose is. Overall, the ability to prevent double spending is essential to fairness because you want to make sure and audit that there's always the same number of Bitcoin. And that keeps it resistant to, fraud and manipulation because it is so transparent. Next is wallets. There's two main types of wallets, and I guess to say that a little bit better, there's actually a third, which is Lightning wallets. But I said earlier, we're not talking about Lightning right now. We're just really talking about on-chain like Bitcoin. There's two main types of on-chain Bitcoin wallets, which are single signature and multi-signature. Single signature wallets are just that. It only requires one signature to move or authorize the transaction. It means that whoever owns the wallet controls it. Not your keys, not your coins is what they say. On the other hand, a multi-signature wallet is still in control of the parties. However, depending on the configuration of the wallet, it needs multiple keys in order to move those transactions. So a 2 of 3 multi-sig would require 2 people to sign the transaction in order for it to be valid. The advantage of this obviously is that with multi-sig, you have that extra layer of security of theft or loss. With a single signature wallet, if the private key is lost or stolen, the funds are gone forever. With a multi-sig wallet, multiple people hold different parts of the overall private key, which reduce its likelihood of that single point of failure. Another advantage of multi-sig wallets is that they can be used to enforce internal controls or accountability. For example, in the church setting, the leadership could set up a multi-sig wallet with multiple authorized signers, ensuring that no single individual can compromise the church's funds. This would increase transparency and reduce the risk of embezzlement or fraud. Overall, I think that multi-sig wallets, they have their disadvantages too, because you have to remember a little bit more information. You have to make sure that other people are keeping control of their keys, and there is an extra piece of information you have to keep with a multi-signature wallet that if you lose, you ultimately lose everything all over again. So The best thing here is to keep your Bitcoin as secure as possible for your own situation. For the church setting, where a transparency and accountability is very important, it makes it really beneficial for the church leadership to, have a managed wallet or a managed node that they operate and that they're in control of, so that the congregation can trust that, trust that source, or can use that source if they don't have their own. Ultimately, it's about being able to trust at the end of the day. And I know that it's very hard for us to trust who's printing the money right now. If we can take control of that money printing through Bitcoin and through the creation of, of a fixed monetary supply, we can really begin to understand where this fits in our Christian life and how we should be using it. Simply put, my why behind my what of doing this is fairness and truth. Fiat, by definition, means by decree. By going over these details of Bitcoin with you and a little bit of my history of how I've learned it, I hope you can see how Bitcoin is built on foundations of fairness and truth, and therefore is a currency that God will bless once understood and used properly. In Hosea 4:6, it reads, "My people are destroyed from a lack of knowledge." Now that you've obtained the knowledge of how money is controlled and manipulated in our society, and how Bitcoin is a fair alternative to the fiat system, my prayer is that you understand the moral obligation that Christ puts to all of us. All hope is not lost. I'm tired of people saying this about our culture and about America. Our children do not have to live with misery because of debt and like $35 trillion that our grandparents probably, unknowingly put us into. I think Jesus said it best, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." There's so many, though. There's biblical scriptures everywhere that speak to this importance of like fairness and truth and justice, especially when it comes to money and financial transactions. Here's just a few. Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. Proverbs 13:11. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring in length, weight, or quantity. Use honest scales and honest weights. Leviticus 19:35-36. The Lord detests honest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. Proverbs 11:1. Do not be the one who shakes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. Proverbs 22:26-27. No one can serve two masters. I think we've heard this. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and love the other. Despite the other, you cannot serve both God and money. I think this is true just to like being respectful to what money is versus who God is. That was Matthew 6:24. Truly, I tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Matthew 19:23-24. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. I like this. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not fail, where no thief comes near and no moth will destroy. And I believe that speaks to like the love that Christ has for us, not just for Bitcoin. Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions. Luke 12:15. The last was Luke 12:33. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Mark 12:17. These verses speak to the importance of honesty, integrity, and fairness in financial transactions. They emphasize the importance of using accurate weights and measures, avoiding debt, and being responsible with money. They also suggest that God favors those who are honest and just in their financial dealings, and that dishonesty and greed will ultimately lead us to hardship. These verses also suggest that Jesus believed money could be a stumbling block for people's relationship with God, and that it was important to prioritize spiritual matters over material possessions or monetary possessions. He emphasized the importance of using wealth to help other people rather than simply accumulating it for oneself. Lastly, there's a few potential reasons why churches may consider adopting Bitcoin publicly as a form of donation. Reducing the need for corrupt money. By accepting Bitcoin, you'll be reducing the need for a centralized currency that's predicated on theft and deception. It will allow you to teach from these principles and give to the poor in a way that builds their future rather than distorts today. Global reach. Bitcoin is a decentralized currency that can be sent and received, obviously, anywhere in the world, permissionless. This means that churches that accept Bitcoin can potentially receive donations from anywhere or send donations to anyone in need, including from and to individuals that may or may not have access to the traditional banking system. I hope this video has helped you at least see how Bitcoin tithing as an option can remove the church's need for corrupt money and lay the foundation for knowledge and understanding, which in turn can lead more people away from sinful desires like debt and right towards Jesus. Tithing in dollars has desensitized us to giving because the dollars are simply printed and inflation exists. The trust of tithing has completely lost its meaning. It's extremely hard now for us to understand this concept of finite because of the numbness of paper money. I fully believe that if people understood Bitcoin and they understood tithing in Bitcoin, they would understand the importance of tithing again. It's important to note that not everyone in the congregation is going to be ready to make this move to tithing in Bitcoin when the church is ready to move. Whether or not they're going to start with a multi-signature wallet or they're going to start with a company or a bigger institution to start this, I think that whatever move they make, the church should make it public and clear that Bitcoin tithing is an option, especially for your online campus. The church should also provide education and resources for those who are interested in learning more about Bitcoin and specifically what Jesus says about money.